The floor goes to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
À mon tour, Monsieur le Président, je commence mon discours.
Sir, I would like to start by thanking you in French for having organized this Security Council meeting. Mr. President, the six-point plan was stillborn. Arab observers and then UN observers bear false witness no to the peaceful political situation, no to a national dialogue, no solution other than giving weapons to arm the opposition. Foreign military intervention and the fall of the regime are unassailable points. Safe corridors, buffer zones and provisional governments must be established. Combating the authority of the Syrian state and the fall of its institutions, these are irreversible. The Syrian president has lost all legitimacy and should relinquish power. These are quotes from official statements attributed to representatives of certain countries represented here and others coming from our region. These are the very substance of the statements and tendencies of certain Arab regional parties and international ones supporting the armed groups and those representing them outside Syria. How is it possible to put an end then to violence and to resolve the crisis in Syria by peaceful means? Is it not high time for us all to learn the lesson of the disasters that have been brought about by policies of foreign interference exercised by certain influential international powers in the internal affairs of other member states? As a counterpart, the Syrian government has responded to legitimate claims of the people and has displayed openness and a positive spirit to all initiatives taken intending to settle the crisis by peaceful and political means, including therein the six-point plan, clearly supported by Syria. In order to implement this, Syria fully cooperated with the observer mission, making available to them all required facilities pursuant to the agreements reached with the United Nations through the action of Mr. Kofi Annan and respecting national sovereignty. Syria also welcomed the final communique published after the Geneva Working Group met on the 30th of June this year. In accordance with the official communique published by the Syrian Foreign Minister, my country gave its consent also to the appointment of Mr. Lakhdar Brahimi as the special representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations. I should like to take this opportunity to greet him most warmly. But what, ladies and gentlemen, is odd is that certain states which had rallied a consensus for the Geneva communique have done everything they could to bury it alive just a few hours after its release by taking non-agreed parallel routes aiming to put an end to all measures or all endeavors to put a peaceful end, to bring a peaceful end to the crisis in Syria, while putting an end to the national dialogue directed by Syria and promoting the inevitable imminent nature of military intervention under humanitarian pretexts, confirming the existence of virtually hysterical obsession amongst the leaders of these countries to target Syria as a country and as a people. Sir, the mistaken and non-objective reading by certain people of the situation and policies involving internal interference in Syrian affairs, as well as a failure to cooperate on the part of certain countries with the six-point plan, have all been factors contributing to or leading, alas, to the resignation of Kofi Annan and to the decision not to extend the observer mission in Syria. We want intentions to be sincere today when people talk of addressing the humanitarian aspects of the crisis. There are those who claim they wish to help the Syrian people, but provided that this assistance be provided just to the last Syrian in Syria. It is quite clear, patently clear, that, alas, certain states do not see the issue of humanitarian aid any way other than as part of a biased political agenda. They refer to aid in their own interests, interfering in the internal affairs of other states. Were this session truly devoted to a discussion of the best possible way of providing humanitarian aid to the Syrian people, why then do some people insist on promoting action outside the UN framework, clearly contravening the international text of the UN Charter? We fail to understand how it is that certain countries provide humanitarian aid with even modest sums by imposing prior conditions via the OCHA, or the Coordination Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs, and at the same time imposing unfair sanctions which have detrimental effects on the life of the Syrian people by affecting their welfare, depriving them of medicines and resources. How is it possible to understand that certain states have done everything to freeze Syria's member status of the Arab League and the Islamic Cooperation Conference on the pretext of sympathizing with the Syrian people and talking of humanitarian aid in Syria, while some of these states have not even made a contribution to funding the humanitarian response plan signed by OCHA with the Syrian government, while being aware that scanty funding is the major obstacle to implementing this humanitarian response plan. Here, I would like to refer to a Chinese axiom, vision to wit, wisdom starts by calling things as they are, naming things as they are. So, if intentions are sincere, the best way of bringing aid to the Syrian people lies in the need to dealing with the causes that have led to their sufferings, because persistent action of armed groups with external support has destroyed infrastructure, health and education centers, roads, communications, sources of energy, religious sites and museums, while stirring up violence and intimidating peaceful citizens. All of these factors explain the intolerable suffering which has been worsened when armed groups have endeavored to exert military control over residential areas in some of the main towns, using civilians as human shields. I would encourage you to read the article of the British journalist published by Robert Fisk in The Independent, recounting what he witnessed in Aleppo. This article corroborates what we are saying. This description, ladies and gentlemen, entirely tallies with the admissions of senior officials of the United Nations, General Mood, for example, and others. There is further proof in that armed groups refer to the Battle of Homs and the Battle of Damascus and sometimes the Battle of Aleppo, as if these were battles being fought beyond the Syrian borders, or battles being fought between Syria and a foreign state. No one can deny, for example, that Homs and Aleppo are both Syrian towns. And there, ladies and gentlemen, we must ask, is there any state in the world which would allow armed elements, terrorists, mercenaries, supported by foreigners, to control areas of their towns? Is there a single government which would agree to halt its duty to protect its citizens, leaving them to the mercy of extremism, terrorism and violence? May I support what I'm saying by facts? Here you have a table with 107 names of Arab and non-Arab terrorists who killed in Aleppo, killed by the forces of order. This table includes names, shows nationalities, and other details. We are willing to provide it to you. There are Tunisians, Libyans, Saudians, Palestinians, Jordanians, Egyptians, etc. These were not Syrian citizens, sir. Syria has hosted thousands of refugees over the years from Iran because of acts of hostility with which Syria had nothing to do. Mr. Guterres, who is present here, knows full well what we're talking about today, because he has been and is an eyewitness of Syria's hospitality to Arab and non-Arab refugees, welcomed freely by my country. Syria has not endeavored either to promote or profit from their cause in international fora. Sir, my country has not hoisted tents to shelter refugees who found asylum in their territories. They did not welcome them in camps at the borders or in deserts to exploit them or to play with their hopes. Quite the opposite. Syria has fulfilled its duty, sharing its own resources with them and treating them exactly the same as its own citizens, with links of brotherhood and human responsibility, observing its international commitments. Today, Syria feels great bitterness and sorrow when we see some of our brothers living in tents on the border in dreadful conditions, being dissuaded by attempts at intimidation from returning home. Their dignity is flouted. They are turned into refugees, prisoners of these camps. The least one can say of them is that they are detention camps, if one were to describe them. We ask those countries who have taken in Syrian refugees, we ask them to allow these refugees, all of those refugees who wish to return, to allow them so to do and not to prevent them from returning to their motherland, Syria. As we say this, we would also like to thank all of those who have stretched out a hand of friendship to Syrian refugees without imposing any prior conditions. Some of these camps have become military camps or areas for terrorists, trained so that they can be subsequently sent to Syria to commit ignoble crimes, as is always is happening and still happening in Aleppo. Sir, what certain capitals are planning for Syria and plotting is one thing, and what the Syrian people wants is another when it comes to true reforms and a better life. Because the challenges are not concerned only with legitimate claims for reform, but the major challenge today is one of protecting Syria as a state and of countering the extremist terrorist agendas aiming at condemning Syria to inquisitional tribunals and the Dark Ages. Syria, a country which has always been a place of tolerance and of great history. Syria will always be the land of all. It was a civilization before it was even a state. We have listened very attentively, ladies and gentlemen, to the statement of His Excellency the French Minister of Foreign Affairs on the 29th of July last. I quote here, "On the basis of the information available to us, arms are provided by Qatar and Saudi Arabia and other states." Qatar, Saudi Arabia and other states. We understand these to be armed groups in Syria, end of quotation. So we would like to know of France, with this information then on arms trafficking to Syria, that it would take the appropriate measures that it must take, bearing its responsibility as a permanent member of the Security Council and current Council President, in order to ensure the meticulous respect of the United Nations Charter and international law, as well as the Security Council resolutions 2042 and 2043. Because no one ignores the fact that turning a blind eye to such arms trafficking, going to armed elements in Syria, is flouting all these provisions. Major Turkish and international newspapers have recounted the role of the Turkish government and not the Turkish people, this neighboring of people, this friendly neighbor linked to us historically and geographically. The international press has spoken of the role of Turkey in spreading Syrian blood. Why do we say this? Mr. Kofi Annan attributed his lack of success to three main causes. One of these involves the failure to cooperate on the part of states and parties with influence on the armed groups. Obviously, everybody knows that the neighbor country here, Turkey, had it merely hosted the Syrian refugees, would have done nothing else. But the fact that it is harboring armed groups, perpetrating cross-border crimes in my country, the fact that Turkey is allowing these groups to set up training camps intended for Salafist extremists, and groups going back to the Dark Ages, to prehistoric times. Well, here the Turkish government, and I do say carefully the Turkish government and not the Turkish people, is becoming the executioner of Syria. I would have liked to have said this to His Excellency the Turkish Minister for Foreign Affairs and not to my friend and brother, the Ambassador of Turkey, with whose moral integrity and great moral probity I know full well. Regarding the traffic, arms traffic through Lebanon, this is perpetrated via Lebanese political parties and not officially by Lebanon. The President says it's the turn of Lebanon when the Lebanese government confiscates a vessel loaded with arms coming from Libya with the name Musala. Well, it must call down upon it the wrath of God when the Lebanese authorities seize this going to Syria. This is not worthy of the very close links between the two countries. This vessel, ladies and gentlemen, was followed by 7 others, also loaded with arms, intended for the Syrian armed groups, the Syrian militia. His Excellency, the Minister regretted the presence of 20,000 Syrians in Lebanon, but I would remind him that one day our aircraft welcomed thousands of Lebanese in Syria after the Israeli aggression in 2006. We did not turn to the Council to ask for aid. We welcomed our Lebanese fellows open-armed. Ladies and gentlemen, the closure of certain embassies in Damascus means that it is no longer possible for certain states to follow events as they really happen in Syria. This means that they are not able to analyze the situation and the facts properly. I cannot reproach the Moroccan representative for what he said here, because I do not wish to rub salt in the wound of some, I would invite His Excellency, the Moroccan Minister, to realign his sights and to readjust the relationship with other countries by answering the demands of the Moroccan people and ignoring certain royal archaic practices which have now become archaic. Morocco should stop, for example, kneeling before the king and kissing his hand, these archaic practices. Now, we're talking of a people living in the Sahara and demanding their rights. When I was a young diplomat and during the presidency of François Mitterrand, as a young diplomat in the Syrian embassy, I retained from my time in France and in the cultural and educational establishments in Paris in particular, I retained excellent memories. I learnt at the time of the values of independence and intransigence, national values. When any foreign interference or intrusion in internal affairs of any country was at stake. I obviously was familiar with the major universal messages of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Voltaire, Montesquieu, and others. And amongst the fine principles of international law, of which I learnt during my post-university studies in Paris, I recall today a principle which I hold very dearly, vis to wit, the principle that state symbols should be respected, the most sovereign ones for each nation. That is the president of a state. Hence, Mr. President, I shall refrain from the slightest criticism of France and its senior ministers. As you spoke to me, and here I turn to the minister, you addressed me as a representative of my country. On behalf of my people and my government, I wish to express our most serious concern regarding the addition of a new shadow over our old relations and our memories going back to the period of the occupation. Since in 1946, we have endeavored to expunge these memories. To conclude, Mr. President, I should like to turn to my colleague, the representative of Germany, who called for the establishment of the Syria of the future for all Syrians, irrespective of their origin. And he also said that there's no future for Bashar al-Assad in the new Syria. And I would like to ask you, who authorizes you to speak on behalf of the Syrian people? And secondly, Is this not violating diplomatic practice in this august assembly? If the permanent representative of Germany really did want to build the Syria of the future for all Syrians, why has the daily paper Die Welt, the German paper, published an article 2 days ago stating, and I quote, that the German government at present is working in the Bundestag on a plan to make the necessary arrangements to host the Christians from Syria, Why just the Christians? And why do you want to dismember this Syria which you have all praised? The response is yours. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. As you were speaking, France's mandate